Is it that time of the week again? We get to the end of the week, we have a bit of a tipple with friends, try and solve the world's problems, talk about things that we know nothing about and people shouldn't take us seriously in any way about, and we try and solve the world's problems. This Friday, we have an old friend, Simba. We go back to high school.
Long time ago.
I may have made you polish my shoes or one or two other such errands. Maybe go to tuck shop with no money and come back with some change.
The good old days, right?
Yeah, well, welcome. He's a doctor now. And of course, we've got Rufaro, as usual. Are you wearing a bow tie?
Yes, I am.
Why?
Well, Tinashe is not here, so last week it was your turn to be the resident fashionista. You had an interesting hat. So not only am I wearing a bow tie, I'm wearing a pink bow tie, which is something
well, I don't think that's pink. I think that's pink.
Yeah.
What kind of socks are you wearing? Are you wearing socks?
I am.
And is that a floral shirt, Simba?
Yes, absolutely. It's spring, right?
Yeah, we're all drawing inspiration from Tinashe.
Anyway,
What
are we drinking?
In Harare.
What are we drinking?
Yeah, we got a gift again this week. We seem to be quite popular with our fans. And so my friend Tafazo Mahachi is a fan of the show and decided that we should drink something from his stock. And we've got this wonderful 18-year-old single malt.
It can vote.
Yes, it's old enough to vote. It's matured in sherry and bourbon casks. And yeah, it's been one of my favorite for a long time. I understand you're doing.
Yeah, no, we're not letting you pour again after last week. So, did you gentlemen know that our president turned another year older this week?
Ah, happy birthday!
Happy birthday to him.
Indeed. Should we sing?
No, no. Well, you were in the choir, weren't you?
Do not bring up those memories, Joe. Do not.
Maybe you should.
No. I lost my voice when I lost my hair, like Samson.
Well, you didn't have any hair in high school either.
I had a lot more than I do now.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well,
Tafazo, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, Tafazo. So not only is it Edie's birthday this week, we also remember the arrival of the Pioneer Column in Harare in 1890. So these guys have been with us now for 131 years. I thought it would be interesting to reflect a little bit on, what's happened to this country since then. What have we learned? What's the good? What's the bad? What's the ugly? Simba, maybe you can kick us off, being an eminent member of the medical profession. From you guys' point of view, what's the significance of the Pioneer Column arriving at the copy, 12 September 1890?
Okay, well, I guess from my side, if I look at it professionally, I think the world of medicine has changed dramatically from what we had in 1890 to what's there in 2021. It may have changed more in different places in the world, but even here in Zimbabwe, there have been a lot of changes. And to a large extent, a lot of the infrastructure development and the public and private sector facilities owe a lot of what's there today to the history of the Pioneer Column. And by the way, hospitals were never built then as profit-making enterprises. It was because people died. The pioneers came and died of malaria and diseases. And so people realized early on that we need functioning healthcare systems. So the first guys who actually came up.
People die now of cholera.
Well, in Zimbabwe.
And stuff like that. And we're not building. Okay, anyway, sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, in Zimbabwe. But the first guys who came, there was a lot of death from waterborne diseases, but particularly malaria. And if you can imagine, in 1890, across the world, there weren't really great functioning healthcare systems. So it's quite interesting that our initial healthcare system here in what was then Rhodesia or whatever you call it then in 1890 was driven by the need for the few settlers who came to not die, because it doesn't help for people to come by wagon from Cape Town and all end up dead. So initially, it was actually Catholic nuns, Roman Catholic nuns, because the missionaries came up with these guys. and the Roman Catholic nuns
There were
actually.
nuns on the
Yes. So initially there were no women, but
Okay.
the Roman Catholic nuns followed suit soon afterwards, because the Jesuit guys were like, guys, you need to come up here, because the nuns then really ran most education and health systems, and that's why to this day there's a lot of Jesuit facilities, educational facilities, and Jesuit related hospitals, right?
So this is the Jesuits and the Dominicans.
Yes. So the initial setup for nursing facilities was actually from the nuns, and if you look for those who trained at Parinyatua today, a lot of the nurses' residential facilities are named after some of these nuns. People know the names of people like Mother Patrick. In fact, where Mukwati building is today is where the first rudimentary hospital was. And there were, in fact, there's a little building there which is still named the Mother Patrick Mortuary. It's actually a national monument.
Really?
It is, yeah.
Is that where they keep our IDs?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I don't know what they keep there today, right? So eventually, that's where the initial setup was, and it was mostly Roman Catholic nuns. There were doctors who came up with the pioneer column at different times, but a lot of these chaps are not coming because they wanted to be, altruistic and change the lives of Africans. Some of these chaps like Jameson were coming up to make money. They were coming up to make money, and albeit in the process, treated Lobengula of his gout and got some concessions and made a lot of money off it. But a lot of it was not altruistic.
Like you guys.
But look, I think it's quite interesting that you bring up that point, because when Africans talk about imperial colonialism, basically we talk about it as a great evil, and we like to list all the different ways in which it was horrible. And yet there were some collateral benefits from imperial colonization. And one of those is the fact that before the pioneer column rocked up into this part of the world, we had very high infant mortality and population growth was marginal. And what,
if at all.
So what the pioneer column did with the transformation of healthcare in this part of the world is it actually significantly reduced infant mortality. It increased the fertility rate significantly. And it's quite likely that if we had been left to our own devices, right, if they just said, look, this part of Africa will not be colonized, Zimbabwe today would have a much, much smaller population. And it's a good chance that the three of us wouldn't have been born.
So we must be grateful that we were colonized.
No, I'm not saying we must be grateful. Don't get me wrong. You're conflating things. I'm simply saying that in as much as we love to
bow-tie, big words.
Yes, I'm the resident fashionista and nutty professor. So, in as much as it's important to enunciate all the evils of the colonial regime, I think we must also take note of some of the ways that we benefited. It doesn't.
So wait, you say there was no meaningful population to talk about then?
No.
How many people were in this territory?
The population in 1890 was about 300,000, and the
less
population
less than the population of, say, Mutare.
Definitely,
Yeah.
right?
In the whole country.
Yeah, and population growth was marginal. It was almost zero.
But we were having lots of kids.
Yes, and most of them were dying.
So what did these guys do when they arrived that made us go from less than the population of Mutare to, how many are we now? 15, 16 million in the country, and goodness knows how many.
Yeah, about 3 million in South Africa.
In the diaspora.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are the key things that?
Well, so I think there's multiple aspects to it, but the first thing is in terms of the way people's living styles were. People were disrupted. People were moved from certain areas and put into those reserves. So I guess if there's more of you in one place, there's going to be more reproduction, right? that follows, right? That follows. The second thing is access to maternal health services, and this started not just what we know today as the clinics and maternity hospitals, but even as far back as the 1920s and 1930s, there were rural facilities with access to trained birth attendants, people to assist with difficult delivery. So that 10% of babies who could be lost at childbirth because of pregnancy and childbirth related issues, you minimize that already, right? And then of course there were things to do with food accessibility, the way our diets changed, and people started eating sadza and you name it. So there were, I think, the population growth was based on.
What you mean? We didn't eat sadza before these guys came.
Oh, we didn't eat sadza before these guys came.
No,
We did. Sadza's not our national diet. That's not our national food.
What is?
I honestly, I don't know, but it wasn't sadza. Sadza was given to us maybe in the 17 or 1800s or something and it was.
Well, maize is not indigenous to this part of
maize
the
is not.
world.
It's South American or something, and it was brought here as something easy to grow, easy to feed large populations.
No, I don't even know who I am.
Maize is not our national.
This is like
we call it our
You've been
national.
banting for a minute, so you've abandoned who you.
We call it our national food. It's not.
Oh right, sorry, we interrupt. Yes.
Yeah.
So okay, healthcare, diet, concentration of populations.
And then, so I think it's a it's really a combination of factors, right? That then allowed people to then be the net fertility rate actually did go up, and as a result, the African population rose quite a lot between about 1920 and about 1950 and 1960. But also, to be fair, a lot of the healthcare related investment and interventions were not purely altruistic. It was not because the settler said,
You don't need to use the word purely. It wasn't at all altruistic. It was convenient.
Let us give them health, right? But it makes sense that if you need a workforce for certain things like agriculture, mining, construction, you want a healthy workforce.
It helps if they don't die.
Yeah.
It's like in the US, the slave masters fed the slaves, right?
Yeah.
Not because they wanted them to be sated.
And there's an interesting quote that I read in one of the journals. It was from the fellow, he came from the UK in 1931. He replaced Andrew Fleming, after whom what Paringat was named today.
Mm-hmm.
He was the national, they didn't call them Minister of Health, but he was basically the guy in charge of the Rhodesian health system thing. And he actually said, the native is a reservoir for diseases. and the native, unfortunately, surprisingly looks well, despite him being a reservoir for many diseases, upon which the European is not aware of and may only discover when too late. Thus, it is important to treat the native of these diseases, lest the European becomes sick from these horrible maladies. That was the attitude. So it was important to treat the native of his diseases.
You know, as a farmer, if you've got roadrunner chickens and broilers on your farm, you either keep them completely separate or you treat the roadrunners for diseases they don't have.
Okay.
Or that you don't think
so
they have.
Which ones were the Africans, the roadrunners?
I don't know. But if you don't treat the roadrunners, your broilers are going to die.
Okay.
I think you're going to get some interesting comments
about
that analogy.
I think so.
Anyway, sorry.
So a lot of it was about making sure that your workforce is healthy and fit. A lot of it was also about making sure that they don't get diseases spreading to them, right? And as a result, they treated people. But slowly but surely, there was now, the initial setup had white doctors and white nurses treating everybody. And slowly but surely, as the population grew, it became impossible for that small population of white doctors and nurses, mostly foreign trained in South Africa or in Europe, to manage this growing population. And then there became a need to increase training. So how we now have locally trained nurses, and my mother is a retired nurse. She trained in the 1970s.
Wow.
But yeah,
Where?
Pilo. Yeah. So what then happened was people realized, wait a minute, this can't go on. We have to train the natives to take care of the natives, and so that the native helps himself. So they then started training nurses, because nurses were the backbone, and to this day are still the backbone of most healthcare systems. So in the 1950s, they started allowing African and colored people into nursing school, and that boosted the numbers. And then what they by and large did were the white nurses would nurse the white people, the black nurses, and the colored ones would nurse their own people. And then
who looked after the Indians and the Chinese? Sorry, anyway.
There were much smaller populations, but I suspect that they were lumped there. Yes. And then eventually by the 1960s, around the time of UDI actually, that's when the medical school opened in 1960. It was 1963 when the medical school opened in combination with the University of Birmingham, because people realized you could not have a growing black and white population serviced by
expatriates.
It didn't work. And then once again, my father was trained at the University of Rhodesia then in the 1970s as well. So I look, for me,
Your dad was a doctor trained pre-1980?
Yeah, he's retired now, but he trained at the University of Rhodesia in the 1970s. So I look, for me, it's a deeply personal journey when you study the history, because it's influenced who I am today and where I am, not just from my career-wise, but from a personal experience as well.
So we suddenly started producing all of these doctors and nurses as early as 1950s, but doctors as early as 1960s.
The first cohort, 1968. The first cohort graduated 1968 from the University.
We were producing doctors locally, and we've continued to do so.
Mm-hmm.
When did we start exporting doctors and nurses? Because it's a big export.
It is huge. Absolutely.
When
huge.
did we start exporting them?
So,
and why?
En masse. So there was, in the 70s and 80s, there was still a large population of locally trained people who went to then specialize, because you could do your basic medical training, but you couldn't do specialist training. So you had to go to the UK or Poland or wherever else. And as we created closer relationships with communist states in the 1980s, a lot of people went to Russia, Poland,
China,
etc., to do specialist medical training.
Czech Republic, Croatia.
But immigration for financial reasons became a big issue from the 90s going forward, when income started to drop and quality of life became an issue. And then we started seeing big exports. And by the late 90s, the brain drain was really, really going. And I mean, to this day, I think we have a net brain drain. For every 100 people who qualify, I can say to you, I'm not sure what the exact statistics are, but anecdotally, from my experience as someone who's worked in this industry for the last 16 or so years, and people I've worked with, a good 55 or 60% are leaving.
Wow. So do we have enough, or are we now short? Have we ever had enough?
So there's a difference between numbers, quantity versus quality. So there's certain, for example, I will talk about nurses, right? There are different kinds of nurses, right? If you're in an intensive care unit, the person who's taking care of you is an intensive care trained nurse. If you're in a maternity unit, you've got a midwife. If you're in theater, there's a theater nurse. Then if you're just in a general ward, run-of-the-mill stuff is a general nurse. So a lot of the higher trained nurses, especially intensive care nurses, have been in demand, particularly in the first world. So there's been a really huge outflow of those, right? Likewise, with the doctors as well, there was a big outflow of specialists in the 1990s and early 2000s. And within the region, there's been a big outflow as well of general medical officers, just your GP level doctors who've gone and manned hospitals in Namibia and Swaziland, Lesotho to this day.
But it's all about money.
Of course.
I thought this was a vocation.
The dollar bill.
I thought it was a vocation.
Vocations don't pay bills, George. Vocations don't pay your mortgage. Vocations don't. You can't go to a fuel station and flash your vocation. Your vocation. At the end of the day, the reason why everybody gets up and goes to work.
So what do you think the problem is? Because I think that like we've been in the business world for a minute, and there are areas of our economy that are thriving that have no shortage of highly skilled individuals. So take, for example, the platinum mines in this country. They employ some of the world's best mining engineers and metallurgists and professionals in that sector. So what are we getting wrong in healthcare? If you had a blank piece of paper and it was up to you to change some of the policies that are driving people away, what would you do?
That's a tough one, Faro, because the first thing is this: 85 to 90% of Zimbabweans access their care through the public health system, right? Which means it's public hospitals, clinics, local clinics, etc. So the staff who work in there are remunerated by the government. It's only a good 10 to 15% who get their care privately, where it's perhaps slightly more lucrative to be practicing as a doctor and nurse in a private health setting. But if you're only servicing 10 or 15% of the population, there's no scale to grow it. So in terms of opportunities for young doctors, young nurses to grow careers, private sector, it's very limited, right? And it's as more people are being squeezed into that 85 to 90% and being moved from that 10 to 15%, there's more demand in the public sector for care, but lower incomes. It's very hard.
It's about money.
Yeah.
We just need to pay these guys
Okay,
properly.
so I'm a ardent free market capitalist, and one of the problems that I perceive with anything that's state run is that it's run badly. And so, what's your view? You know, if a radical like me said, you know what, government has no business running any of these things, they should just offload them to the private sector, and the private sector, through the mechanism, the invisible hand of the free market, will come up with solutions at every price point that cater for the poorest, most vulnerable, to the well-to-do. Do you think if we ran that experiment, it would work out?
I don't think so. I
Why?
think that requires a significant percentage of the population that can then pay fair value for a service to work. And I just don't think we have that in Zimbabwe. We don't have.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
You've got poor relatives, right?
absolutely. I'm a poor relative myself.
No, you're not poor. I've got relatives that are under your care, and I pay your bills. You're not poor. But you got poor relatives.
Yeah.
Do you know poor relatives who want to get drunk and don't?
They always make a plan, right?
So why do you think that your poor relatives wouldn't be able to pay for their healthcare?
If there was a product at every price point, right? Because what I'm saying is, if you walk into an institution that's government run today, that's completely dysfunctional, right? And
He does twice a day.
Yeah, regularly.
He goes to Goma. What's it called now?
Harare Hospital. Yeah.
It's not called Harare.
Salim Mugabe Central Hospital.
Yes, and
Right.
you go to.
So,
It's still called Pari.
Yeah.
right? So if there was space for an entrepreneur in the medical field to come and set up shop and compete, right, and offer, you know, a slightly better product at the same price point, and somebody who's sick in that demographic, if they had that option of to choose between a completely dysfunctional state-run institution and, you know, one run by a mercenary, but run well, where things actually work, where they, you know, deliver what you promise. You don't think that model would work?
I think it would work for a certain, probably your middle class, but the majority of people cannot. You know,
But they can afford to get drunk, but they can't afford their.
I think you can get alcohol for $1 in Harare.
But why can't you get healthcare for $1?
Because so the healthcare comes with numerous expenses. There's an HR expense. There's sundries and drugs. That's a huge expense. The large majority of which are imported, right? So that's why even in the public sector, there may be humans there, right? You walk into a facility there, and there are humans wearing uniforms and stethoscopes, but you're given a long list to say, well, we don't have this drip, that drug, that. Go and buy that, and you cross the rails to buy it in a private for-profit pharmacy. That's important.
And you think cheap alcohol falls from the sky?
No, absolutely not. But $1, George, I guarantee you can get drunk on $1.
And why do you think if the market was left to its devices, it wouldn't devise cures?
I think I like the way you think, and I think there's potential to explore that. But I think because of the in terms of the particularly your drugs and sundries aspect, you can't just create drugs behind. You know, some of these illicit brews are brewed in someone's house, right? In someone's backyard.
I think you did,
but you don't make antibiotics in someone's backyard.
I think I didn't make you polish enough shoes.
You can't brew antibiotics
in high school
and vaccines in someone's backyard.
Let people try. But anyway, I know you've got to get going.
Yeah.
You've got more important things to do than debate sort of useless points with us. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I think you're a good candidate for a hangover episode.
And
we need to go down this rabbit hole and really figure out why I can get drunk when I'm poor, but I can't get cured when I'm poor.
I'll be back.
Very important.
Like Schwarzenegger.
Hasta la vista, baby. Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome back. Titch,
Hi, George.
2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I know.
Sony, are we in
What's
the
this
same
all about?
WhatsApp group?
Must be.
What's up with the bow tie?
Must be. You know, when I thought I'd stop by and have a chat, I just thought, look, it's really important to try and look the part because you guys are talking about important matters. That's really the center of my
You know,
interest.
so unlike me, you're not trolling Tinashe.
No, far from it.
What color socks are you wearing?
Oh yeah, well,
Oh, yeah,
gray
yeah,
with
yeah.
blue polka dots.
Inspired by Tinashe. Anyway,
But I hardly thought about it.
Anyway, Mson.
Yeah.
Twitter should more fun.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's enough for
Chasura.
you.
Much appreciated.
I'm not a Chasura.
Unga.
Thank you.
Okay, Unga.
I've tried on many occasions to educate you on this.
Yeah, it depends what time of day, but I'll take that.
Anyway, so earlier on, we had Dr. Simba. I think you know Dr. Simba.
Yeah.
We were
Great guy.
talking about
Great guy.
Pioneer Column.
Yeah.
Arrived 131 years ago,
Mhm.
12th of September, and he was taking us through, some of the key developments in the medical sector,
Mhm.
how it impacts us currently. Rufaro and I are of the belief that if I can get drunk for $1, I should be able to get a cure for
$1.
$1 for liver
You've
cancer.
obviously tested
or,
that theory.
No,
No,
well,
he's not running that experiment. But anyway,
well, I also don't try and get drunk on $1.
Yeah. I'd
But,
recommend you don't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
In the absence of Tinashe, as
Yeah.
an economist,
Yeah.
we know you're not a real one.
Well, you do know that I did work for The Economist, right?
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
No, we didn't know that.
Yeah.
They actually had you?
Yeah, they had me for 4.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So
I'm not supposed to say things like this.
Yes. Well, you haven't even had your first drink. Anyway,
Yeah.
So 131 years since these guys showed up at the copy.
Yeah.
Put up a flag, renamed the place. What do you make of it?
I like the story of the Pioneer Column because what makes it so important is it set the tone for the next 131 years. In the Pioneer Column, you had names like Star Jamison, Pennefather, Frank Johnson, all of whom we still have crypts, we still have streets named after them.
Mm.
But what's peculiar is that Frank Johnson was in charge of the Pioneer Column. He was 23 years old. He was described as an adventurer.
He was 23,
Yes,
in charge of the whole thing.
yes.
Wow.
And he had a contract with the British South African company, which belonged to Cecil John Rhodes. And Cecil John Rhodes essentially outsourced some dirty work to Frank Johnson. Frank Johnson essentially led a bunch of people to occupy land, but the British South African company did not have the right to occupy land. They had gotten a right to extend the kingdom on behalf of Queen Victoria. They had gotten an agreement with Lobengula to do mining and some administrative work, but not to occupy land. They'd gotten approval to explore, but they never got the permission to occupy land.
So
the
Rhodes
Pioneer-
sent a 23-year-old to go and do this, to go
I
and
think
occupy the land.
the
anyway.
reason they called him an adventurer is because, the BSAP had estimated they'll need a force of 2,500 people. And this young adventurer at 23 said, look, I'll take 250 people and I need 9 months to take over whatever land is out there. Now, because of that, Cecil John Rhodes raised money. He raised £1 million on the guise that he was extending the kingdom. $200,000 of that money, that was
Dollars, pounds?
pounds, 1888. That money came from the Oppenheimer family. And this
thought they
young
were our
adventurer,
friends.
they are our friends. They
Oh.
still are.
Okay.
So this young adventurer, Frank Johnson, ended up getting £87,000 to run the Pioneer Column.
In
upward.
1890 money.
Yes.
So in today's money,
Yeah.
million and a half.
Yeah, maybe more, much more. But he was able to come this way, set up 3 new towns, and put up the flag at
Three?
Kopi. Yes.
Which three?
You know the one is Mashingo.
Okay.
On their way, they stopped in Mashingo for a while. and that's where they left some of their friends, the Mikos, and they established there. And because part of how you established the column was you would travel up, stop at one place, leave enough people so when you're sending supplies, you're not creating too much of a lead time between bases. So Mashingo was one, and Bulawayo was the other.
And Harare.
And Harare was the last, which became Fort Salisbury. So if you follow the historic names, they're all forts of sorts.
Bulawayo was Fort what?
Well, it wasn't exactly Bulawayo, but it was in the Esigodini. They called it, I forget what it is, but it was called Fort something. Yeah. So
this was basically a mercenary expedition. So one of the first things that Dr. Simbas mentioned in the earlier segment was even the development
But
of
we would
medicine.
call it mercenary in today's language because of today's values. But I think at that time, these guys were entrepreneurs.
yes, thank you.
Buccaneers.
Thank you. Well, I think Rufaro is onto something. I don't know if you've come across the term creative destruction. The Pioneer column is a classic example of creative destruction. German concept, expounded by Schumpeter. To create, you have to destroy. Now, those guys did a lot of destruction. And that was part of their method of creation.
Interesting.
Modernizing a rural backwater.
Well, I wouldn't rush to say that because I think they always say that the victor in history gets to tell us what really happened. But firstly, the Monubutapa kingdom had always been there. We'd always had iron in this part of the world. We'd always had gold. We had a lot of cattle. All of this wealth was sufficient for us in its static form. What you're being made to believe is that the Pioneer column brought civilization, which is not true. Because these people were there, these cattle were there, this gold was there. What they did is they created a hut tax, which wasn't there. And what the hut tax did is it forced all the men out of their homes and forced them to work for the Pioneer column members. So essentially it created a labor force which the Pioneer column came without. And all these people had to do was work so they could pay their taxes and get the peace they needed for their families to go.
But very, very important point. But it also funded the state.
Yes, but they shouldn't have been a state because they had no permission to build a state. But what they did do is they hoodwinked the leaders at the time. They hoodwinked the queen, they hoodwinked Lobengula, they hoodwinked the chief of Mashonaland and said they would just...
So no chief of Mashona. Do not say things like that. We will not allow you to
I'll
get
take
away
it,
with
I'll
it.
take it, George, but I think...
Okay, so when do they rationalize their position of taking over this part of the world? If they didn't have it a priori, when did they sort it out and how?
Well, you know, it's a
Well,
small
they
thing.
never did. There were two big wars fought about this.
Yeah.
You might have learnt about this
Yeah.
in your ZJC history.
or grade 7, if you will. I think the most important thing that the Pioneer column did was they put a flag. As soon as you can put a flag and not be resisted, you've taken over. It's a psychological thing. Everything else is about brute and brawn. But what they did from a psychological standpoint is from the moment they had a flag at the copy, this was territory. What they had to do was defend it. Until today, that's why we have flags. Flags tell us a lot about who owns what and what is going on in the country.
You're in a very dark mood today.
Sorry, I just can't believe that you believe the Pioneer column was an entirely great thing.
Nobody
No,
thinks
nobody
it was
thinks
a great
that.
thing. But I think what's not understood about it is the entrepreneurial nature of it. That
Yes.
this wasn't
Yes.
this wasn't an army, an
No.
invading army from a sovereign state that was expanding into this part of the world. It was a bunch of risk takers. Things could have gone
Buccaneers,
horribly wrong for them,
Adventurer.
and no state would have claimed them.
mercenary.
Yes, yes, but then there's a funny thing about the people that was chosen to become members of the Pioneer column. They chose people from wealthy families because they had anticipated war. If a war had broken out, they wanted people who were rich enough to send the British Army in to protect the pioneer column. There was an incentive for members of the column. Everybody in that column was given 1,200 hectares of land and 15 claims of minerals. So essentially, from the moment they got to
It was a
Fort
mercenary
Salisbury-
expedition.
Yes, but to speak to entrepreneurship, they believed it was worth something.
Okay.
And
Okay,
over
but
time,
fast forward a couple of decades because
Sure.
we're going to run out of time.
But I thought there was a point that he described in that fashion
Okay.
that I think is quite interesting, which speaks to basically.
let
I
me,
think
let,
what
let
you're
me move
saying.
this further away from you.
So I think basically the point that I suspect you were going to make is that this part of the world, in terms of its development over the last 131 years, a critical part, an important part of its DNA is entrepreneurial.
yes. Now, let's not take it away from them. Imagine being 23 and being sent with 87,000 pounds to go and take over land, because the intention was, if he failed completely, Sister John Rhodes would have said
You'd have disowned him.
he would have said he'd never heard of him. Yeah, but he did, and he came here and he was able to distribute that land.
So you're talking about deception and subterfuge.
Yes, yes.
Tronyangirana.
Chicanery. This is how that spirit of subterfuge entered this country. It came with the pioneer column, and I believe it hasn't left yet.
Okay.
I like the way you say that with such finality.
We're not going down that rabbit hole.
It's
We're not going
not
to
a rabbit
indulge
hole.
it.
Tronyangirana.
Our issue is leadership in our country, Zimbabwe, must have several characteristics, one of which must be subterfuge, without which you can't lead in this country. And that is consistent with, even under Smith, UDI was subterfuge.
No, but I mean,
November 1965. Unilateral.
But
I mean,
that
the
was-
term unilateral declaration of independence tells you something.
Okay, rabbit hole alert. Skip a couple of decades.
Yes.
You thought you'd got rid of Tinashe. Back and worse. You cut off one head and 1,000 grow in its place.
like a hydra.
Skip a couple of generations. Generations, decades. Post World War II. Massive growth in the economy.
Up until 1965. Which is the comment I wanted to make when you brought up 1965, is I think that in his long career, that was the biggest mistake Ian Smith made. It was a monumental strategic error. He was much better off if he didn't want to hand over power to the rest of the population. He was much better off conceding the point to the British and saying, okay, look, I'm on board. We're going to start the process of readying a transition of power from minority rule to majority rule, and then just kick the can down the road for as long as possible. You could probably have done that beyond 1980, but he chose to
Agreed.
be emotional because he didn't agree with the British, and he basically decided he was done with them. And not only was he fighting a nationalist movement here, he then had enemies in London and in the West. And that kind of sealed his fate.
I was actually trying to ask a question.
Yeah, carry on.
Have you finished?
Yes. Oh, look, it's the bow tie. You know, I tend to pontificate in a bow tie.
Yeah, as you should.
Because we are running out of time. But I think, but perhaps before we get to, same era, massive growth, post Second World War, Federation, UDI. Can you connect the dots for us?
So, post Second World War, we're in a Marshall Plan global economy. You had a lot of money in Germany, which built what you now know as the Mittelstand. You had a lot
Which
of,
is to lay people.
which is the middle-sized global champions, SMEs of a global nature.
Mhm.
You know, you get companies in Germany that make buttons, and that's like the #1 button-making company in the world. So those companies
Make bow ties.
make bow ties. And these companies came out soon after World War II. But the truth is that money had been funded through the Marshall Plan. Now,
The Americans.
yeah. And we were a British colony. We benefited from a large chunk of what the British had heisted out of the Marshall Plan as well. So there was it was
You've got
artificial.
very colorful language today.
Yeah, but it's because
Have you been talking to international?
no, I haven't, because he's busy with his Parisian friends right now. But the problem was the economic growth was also not delivering political freedom to both black and white Zimbabweans. And that's what led to UDI. Because while they had the resources, they had the massive growth, they had the liquidity, etc., there was a divergence because the British had been giving out independence. Malawi was independent, Zambia was independent.
Oh, but this is 63 now. You're on 20 years post World War.
Well, fair enough. But all of this had led to a view that Southern Rhodesia was going to be let go to the majority population. So before that happened, they took out the legitimacy of the British government to be able to transition.
Well, they didn't. They pretended to. They deluded themselves.
Well,
they
no,
did for
what
15
they
years.
did is the British crossed over and joined the nationalists, and then created this conference called Lancaster House, at which they went in with.
I think you're being generous to the
Nearly a
British.
generation later. But okay, so that's a political side. But can you juxtapose that with the economic side? What was happening? And why is that a golden era in our country's economic history? Is it a golden era?
Now, our golden era, I think, is about to start. That was.
Are you from Kwekwe by any chance?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
But
Carry on,
but
carry
I
on,
last
carry on.
lived there 24 years ago. Please.
Go ahead.
I am from Kwekwe. And just for the record, I took my daughters early this year to Cecil John Rhodes' gravesite. It was quite peculiar because my daughter couldn't believe that he was dead already. Because she can still feel the impact, But I think to come back to what you were saying, the golden era for our country is far from started. Because firstly...
Okay, we don't have a crystal ball, but I think that a lot of people, which is probably what he was really trying to ask you, is a lot of people believe that, post UDI, we had sanctions and we had a lot of import substitution, the manufacturing sector really came into its own because we needed to do a lot of import substitution to circumvent sanctions post 1965. And the discussion in Zim today, in a lot of the business community, is about a revival of manufacturing. But I think that we've never really had a natural competitive advantage in manufacturing. And we conflate this growth in industry post 1965 with a golden era, when in fact it was nothing really but driven by the necessity of survival.
It's hard to agree with Rufaro, but he's right. But
the results were...
No, but Rufaro, you're missing something. The war economy, 65 to 79, required local industry. So you had your Puma, you had your artillery. All of these things
Puma
had to be made. Sorry, PUMA, which was the car.
Did you think he was talking about clothing?
No, I was thinking of a different Puma.
So I think a lot of that has to do with the economy, because since UDI, Smith went into a war economy. And if there's anything that wasn't going to happen, is he will not get sufficient support from the British on issues of...
So he printed money, created industry, and it worked. And we've got command.
But
why is command not working?
No, but that's because there's two sides to it. There's inducing money supply growth, and then there's inducing output growth. Smith did both. What we've been able to do is induce money, but we haven't induced production or productivity.
We've got nearly 3 million tons of maize.
Oh, is that true? Well, get it from me, and I'm keen that you say this, because I do watch a lot about maize. We actually have 800,000 tons of maize in GMB this year, which is amazing because we've never had this much in 21 years. But our storage capacity and our requirement is actually 3.5 million. So the fact that you've been told and you believe 3.5 million is what we have, George, I'd be quite happy to show you some statistics to assist you with taking a view, but 3.5 million is definitely not the
Basically, he's being polite and telling you if you believe that number, he's got a bridge to sell you.
Wait.
At my house. Because if we are 3.5 million, then the price of maize at a legislated level or the government price would definitely come down, because 3.5 million is what we used to need to get 3 years cover in the event of drought. But bear in mind that our population is now 15 million of people in the country. So we do need a lot more than 3.5 million. And we don't have it yet.
Maybe that's a good point to stop before we get any more trouble, and perhaps get you. Can you get evicted from Kwekwe? Or
No, you can't get evicted from Kwekwe. It is the president's birthday, and I know there's celebrations in Kwekwe because, we recognize him as one of our own.
As you should.
Yes.
or maybe rather aptly, at the end of another episode, perhaps the celebrations because takazvarwa takangodaro.
Yeah. Yes.
Unwe subterfuge.
Yes.
Atiregere.
This is true.
Negutije?
Subterfuge is what's in our DNA.
Negutije?
And I'd be quite happy to talk a little bit more about it, because you'll see how, in 3 phases of our country's 131-year history, subterfuge has been at the center.
Atiregere negutije?
Takazvarwa.
It's been lovely having you along. COVID is real. Stay safe. Have a good weekend. Be good. If you can't be good, be good at it.